Welcome to the Haven for Soul Care, the podcast where we explore the art of nurturing the mind, body, and spirit. Each week, we bring you inspiring stories, insightful conversations, and practical tips to help you create a life of balance, peace, and purpose. Whether you're seeking guidance on personal growth, wellness, or simply need a moment to reconnect, this is your safe space. I'm your host, Brianna, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in and take care of the soul. Welcome to the Haven for Soul Care podcast. I'm your host, Brianna, and today we have Jody Weiner in with us on today, who has wrote a book called Raise Your Other Right Hand. I am so excited to have you, Jody. I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself because I think that we're going to have a lot to talk about. So I want you to introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your book.
Okay, sure. I'm originally from Chicago, and I've lived in San Francisco now for 40 years. So more than half of my life, a good portion of more than half of my life here now. But I was a criminal defense lawyer in Chicago for 11 years, and that's how I was trained in law. And then I had a practice in Chicago that was growing. And so I decided that I had, because if you're a criminal defense lawyer, you're 99% of the people you're representing are guilty. But a lot of it is overzealousness by the police. There are a lot of real good defenses in the Constitution that we're entitled to. And as it's abused often. So
Mhm.
it's important to have somebody who's a bulwark for those rules. That's changing now, and I don't want to get into a political discussion today, but it's even more important now than it ever was I think, for people to stand up for justice. So I did it for 11 years, but there's an old saying, you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas. And I started to feel that, am I really helping society by doing this? So I decided, my practice had grown, and I was at a point in my life where I was going to be in Chicago for the rest of my life. And like today, you got snow in North Carolina. I'm out here, it's 50. So it's not 10. And that was a big thing for me to want to get out of Chicago. But more
Mhm.
importantly, I decided that I really wanted to start writing fiction. I didn't want to do criminal law anymore because it was really having a negative effect on me emotionally. So pretty much for therapy, I started writing.
Mhm.
I moved out to California and I said, I'm not going to practice law again until I write my first novel and sell it, which was pretty stupid because I did write it right away in about the first year, but then I couldn't
Mhm.
sell it. And I'm 2 years through, 2.5 years later, I'm writing another book, and now what I had to sell was my car. So, because I refused to take the bar exam, but my sister, who's a lot smarter than me, said, you can do both. It's not against the law to be a
Right.
lawyer and a writer. So I kind of listened to her at that point and went and passed the bar here in California. But so I've been practicing civil law here, and I still do that, but not as much anymore. A lot of the work that I do is pro bono work for folks. I do a lot of service work now, and I'm the head of a nonprofit organization, as you are, that we're a literary festival in San Francisco. So I spend a lot of time working with that. We could talk
Mhm.
about that later. But anyway, so I just decided that first book never got sold, but I kept writing. And then about 10 years later, I did sell a new book. This is now 15 years ago, but that was my first novel. And ever since then, I've really been splitting my time between the two. And as I've gotten older, I've now that this book is out, I can pretty much spend most of my time doing writing.
Oh,
And the new
wow.
book, Raise Your Other Right Hand, not surprisingly, is they tell you, write what you know. So it's a criminal defense story, but it's
Mhm.
it's more than that too. It's a love story also because as well, you can't see, but you could see behind me is my wife's art studio. This is my office, and she's a painter. And she's also part of the inspiration for one of the characters who's in the book. It's a married couple, kind of like the Thin Man stories it's kind of an homage to the Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett. But it's
Mm.
about this couple they're upper scale couple in San Francisco, and he's a lawyer who wants to be a writer. What a stretch, huh? And
Mhm.
she runs a theater company in the city in San Francisco, and she's the mafia daughter. and
Yeah.
they've been married and they're very much in love. So it's their love story, but it's also about the cases that he handles. And in particular, the main focus of the book is about Radon Jalaba, who is a NBA basketball player who gets caught up in he's also drug addicted because he's had two knee surgeries. And he's
Hmm.
on the way to a game at the Oakland Arena here. And his driver, who's also his closeted lover, goes in to score some drugs for him. And during the course of it, mayhem ensues. Policeman's killed, and his friend is killed, and he runs away, and he gets charged with murder. And he can't testify because if he does, he has to expose the fact that he's gay. And there are no, still today, that I'm aware of, there are no out gay basketball players in the NBA. So that's a twist that makes him have to be silent and he can't really testify. So he goes to Archie Krafter, who's the lawyer, who's the husband of Lora Krafter, and he becomes the hero and saves the day. So that's basically what the book's about.
That sounds like a page turner.
It is a page. Well, thank you. I mean, it's also a dark comedy though because it's satirical in the sense that I am satirizing a lot about greed, um, you know, family ties, and really a twisted road to redemption because throughout the book, Radon does come to grips with the problems that he's had throughout the
Hmm.
book. So there is transformation of that character, but it's also because they live a high life in the city. So there's a lot of the excitement around that, which is also sort of like the way that Nick and Nora Charles lived during the 30s and 40s in New York, and it was high society. But he had his friends that were all the criminals. So it's a
Hmm.
combination of that genre.
Oh, wow. How did you come up with this? How do you come up with your storylines?
It came from cases that I had. The
Mm.
actual double murder was a trial that I had in Chicago about it was a drug robbery and during the course of it was pretty much the same plot as what I put into the book in that the two guys, one of my clients, he didn't have a weapon. They went to someone's house who they knew was a drug dealer.
Mhm.
And during the course of that, an altercation ensued. So the guns were drawn, and somebody in the house called the police. The police came to the apartment, and my client tried to jump out the window in the back into the backyard because it was a first floor apartment building. The police had circled the house, and one cop shot into the apartment and killed his partner, who was running towards him. And my client got charged with murder, even though he didn't have a gun. And that was the law. It's still the law pretty much in most of the states. It's a felony murder rule where if you're just happen to be, if you have to be a participant in an armed robbery or an armed, dangerous felony wherein someone dies, even though you didn't pull the trigger, you're as guilty as the perpetrator under our law.
Really?
It's still the case. I'm sure it's the case in North Carolina right now.
I've heard of stories like this, but because that's not I've never dug into it. So you're
Never
telling
killed
me,
anybody.
no, not no, no. I would be lying if I hadn't said I hadn't thought about it. But no, I don't think I could be pretty in a jail suit. So I don't. But I've heard of cases though where people they didn't have any weapon, but they just happened to be at this with someone who
Mhm.
committed a crime such as that, and then they were charged with the same thing.
Correct. Yeah, it's called the felony murder rule, and there's a long line of body of law behind it. It originally came from England from the English law, and it translated to us. And some states have outlawed it. In particular, in California now, you have to literally fire the weapon to be charged with the murder. So
Yeah.
it's changed somewhat, but
Mm-hmm.
anyway, it's still law in a lot of places. And that's another thing I fear that, today in our climate is that things are going to go backwards, unfortunately.
Ooh, yeah. That's the worry that so many people are having. The what do we do? How do we already had some things we had to worry about, but now it's just it's some more stuff that we're having to worry about. So,
Oh, yeah.
um So you're so in this book, there are um other legal issues as well. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just a little bit?
Well, I mean, I can tell you more about the I about what do you say? Oh, yeah. Well, the in addition to the story about Radon and the basketball player,
Mm-hmm.
Laura's brother, Laura's father is the Rapini King of California. He's an aging mobster who she's been estranged from for many years because she doesn't like that lifestyle. And as soon as
Mm-hmm.
she was old enough to get out of, she grew up in near Carmel in California and in San Francisco in a Catholic environment, Roman Catholic environment, and he was like this mafia character in the city. So she left as soon as she could. She went to Europe and then studied acting and played the piano. So she's a musician and she's also a singer songwriter. And in fact, the book has in it some musical scores from songs that she has written. So you could, as you're reading the book, you'll come across songs that she's done, and because she's in the process of actually writing a one person musical piece
Okay.
called The Turnip Princess, because
Uh-huh.
Rapini, which is broccoli Rob, he's called the Rapini King, her father, because they were the first people to literally bring broccoli Rob, the vegetable, from the West Coast to the East Coast to join with the five families of New York, the mafia families. So her grandfather was one of the original mobsters. It's fiction, but this is,
Yeah.
that's the story. But it's based on reality in that there were particular meetings in the Catskills in New York where Capone was there and all, and Lucky Luciano, who was the original mobster, who happened to grow up on the same street that her grandfather grew up on. So he actually started importing broccoli Rob to the East Coast for the first time. But in any event, that's broccoli Rob is actually a turnip green. It's like, I don't know if you've ever had it, but it's a
No.
turnip green. So she wrote this musical called The Turnip Princess, and so she
Uh-huh.
has songs about the Turnip Princess, which is performed. I know these aren't legal issues, but I'm getting to that because her brother Dominic, it's her younger brother, was the only connection that she really had uh, to her family when she was growing up, because her mother died giving birth to her younger brother, and her father always hated him because he blamed his son for killing his wife. But in any
Mm-hmm.
event, so she had to take care of him until she went to college at 18. So they still had a relationship, but he went to work for her father. So that, and at one point in the book, while Archie is in the middle of trying the case with Radon, the one case, her brother gets indicted by the federal government because he's involved in an offshore gambling. They have an offshore gambling place in the island of Mauritius that's run by the family. They own the building there in which this uh, uh, um, cyber crimes are taking place, and that people are being they've rented space where they do their illegal gambling operation to two Slovakian brothers who are geniuses on the web, and they're able
Mm-hmm.
to hack into banks and start stealing tons of money from people's accounts. So they do an entire cyber theft scam, and so her brother gets indicted for being participating in money laundering. And so Archie has to go in, and he doesn't want to defend him because he doesn't want to get involved with the mob. So
Mm-hmm.
that's another strain of legal problems that occurred during the book. So
Oh, wow. Wow.
there's a lot
So,
going on. It's
yeah.
and it's not that long. It sounds like it would be, but it isn't. It's a pretty quick read.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh,
Uh,
wow. Wow. Um, so I mean, because that's really when you got into so there's a part where the we're dealing with Russians who are savvy with the internet, right? And so
yeah.
that sounds like a real life scenario because
Oh yeah.
we
Oh yeah.
we
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
hear
No,
about this all the time, right?
Yeah, they've got a whole bunch of, they got a whole, I mean, you get these calls all the time from those people that are trying to scam you, not only
Yeah.
on the internet, but phone calls. So they were able to hack into some banks and do a complete cyber theft swipe of three different banks. And then finally, Interpol got onto them somewhat. But I mean, literally, they're indicted in California for, and the way it was set up was that they were able to get together at least 100 people who were scammed that were willing to come forward so that they could literally make a case against them in the federal government to shut them down. Because I mean, no one is going to, I mean, this is a real legitimate question. If you're one person who's being scammed, do you know how many people get scammed every day? Every
Mm,
single day that
yeah.
their identities are stolen, the banks. I mean, the numbers are phenomenal. That in order for people to literally prosecute the government to take an interest in this, especially when it's being done from some third world country, it's impossible unless there's a huge budget for it. And in order to do that, they have to show big numbers. So the government in this case, although it's a made up scenario, it's not far from reality. In order to bring charges against someone here in America, they had to get Interpol to go out there and arrest people and extradite them from Mauritius, which is an island off the east coast of Africa, to get them back here to trial. But in order to do that, they figured they had to have at least 100 people that could come in and testify that these people actually, and to make the connection between them, they had to trace the money. So they follow the money.
So I want to say something to you. So you just said a name, and some of the audience might have seen this, but I just literally seen the name and the I guess he's the president or the whoever of Mauritius. And they are inviting, this is real life. They're inviting any foreigner to come over there and retire.
Oh, yeah, I heard. Yes, I heard about that.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Why
they're
not?
like,
Hey,
come
and there's
on.
supposed I've never been there, but there's supposedly beautiful beaches there, and I know that it's a tax haven, which is the other reason that I chose to use it in the book. Right? I've never been to Mauritius. The only thing I knew about it was it's the home of the dodo bird, which doesn't exist anymore. That's another
Okay.
fact you might want to know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting because with you saying this, because one thing from this little commercial that I saw, I thought was
Mhm.
very interesting was they said you do not have to work, but of course you have to be of retirement age, but you have to put into your account every month $1,200.
That's it,
You have to open an account and you have to deposit $1,200 every month.
and you live for free.
And you live for
They
free,
take
but
care of you.
they take care of you, I guess.
Sign me up. I mean,
Well, it was scary to me because I said, well, if they're telling you how much you have to have in your account, um, what are they gonna, what possibly would they do with the money?
Well, obviously they're going to have to support you, I suppose. I mean, I mean, who knows? I mean, you're saying that then you don't get you get a house with that money, you get everything given to you.
According to the commercial, it said that they want you to
Where did
open
you
up a
see
bank
this?
account.
Where did you see this?
Oh, it had to be somewhere online. And it was I don't know, the president or whatever, their leader. Um,
Right.
And he was saying, come on. All you have to do is open up a bank account, be of retirement age, and and it had pretty pictures of, like you said, the beaches and people that were already there. And I
Yep.
was like, well, okay,
Mhm.
$1,200 a month.
There you go.
I said, well, I don't know. I don't know. I'll be scared. But
Well, I mean, compared to that, when you get older, and you go into assisted living or something, you're looking at $6,000, $7,000 a month just to keep somebody alive. It's wild.
that is correct. Yeah, that's different. And I don't want to get into that because I just had I had dealt with that a couple of years ago with a family member and how they're changing the rules, laws when it came down to that. Because it is. Yeah. So if you had to pick your favorite character from this book, who would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough. No one's asked me that question. I probably Laura, because she's kind of the muse for the whole thing. I mean, as I said, the music that I mean, their love relationship is really good. I mean, they in the book they've been together 13 years. They're still in love with each other, but this is tearing them apart because of the connection to her father, and he's calling to bring them in because you know these guys are they're very strong, and she wants to help her brother, but the last thing in the world that Archie wants to do is get involved with the father, so and get involved with the family. So she's probably the linchpin for me, even though it has nothing to do with the basketball player and the crimes, other than through her family, because also her she's a really wonderful artist, and it's that stroke of commitment to your art and to what you love to do is something that was also part of what was imbued in what I imbued into the character was something that allowed me to express my own feelings about art. So that's why it was my favorite character because there's, you know, as a lawyer, you work in your, I guess it's your left brain or is it the right brain? And as an artist, it's the other side. And so
Mm-hmm.
I work in both of those areas and it's really hard to switch from one to the other. And so she was always the easiest way for me to get out of my own self into that other self. So that's why that character represents so much to me
Mm-hmm.
that way. And also, it's based on real life, in that my relationship with my wife is she's was the inspiration for the character. She's a great painter, but she's also a singer songwriter, so it's her music. So she gave me permission to use her music in the book.
I was going to ask you.
There's a lot of the similarities, and people who know us, you know, when they do read the book, because it's not coming out until March 11th. So it
Mm-hmm.
won't be out till next month, but it's available now to get pre-orders if you want. But uh, uh, the people that know us pretty much know that a lot of it is based on our life too,
Mm-hmm.
except for except for the criminal stuff. We don't do
Oh, well,
that.
good,
And
good.
her father was not a mafia guy. He was a great guy. He died at 95,
I'm
but
sorry.
he was a really handsome, but not the smartest tool in the shed. But
Uh-huh.
he marched in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II when he was 18. So he was a
Mm.
little, you know, he was a little damaged from the war, but
Yeah.
not, I mean, but physically handsome and a really great strapping guy. And so I don't know why I started talking about her father, but oh,
No, you're fine. You're fine. You're
well,
fine.
anyway, he was another inspiration because I literally wrote a screenplay about him. So
Really? So you write
yeah,
screenplays as well?
I have, yeah, yeah. This one is, and then this was adapted for streaming series, but it's not, it hasn't been sold yet. So, but
Okay.
it's called Heck No, and it's a story about an octogenarian coming of age, and he's because his in real life, my wife's mother, she died when he was 75, and he had another life for another 20 years as Gigolo Joe because when he became single, because he'd been so consumed by his wife, she was very strong-willed and never let him out of the house. It was one of those things. He was, you know, so he was free. So it just so happened that my mother-in-law and my mother died 2 weeks apart, and
Oh.
so and she lived down. My mother lived down in Florida in a condo, and because my dad had passed before, and we took my father-in-law down to the condo in Florida, and he just loved it so much he started dating. He would go out. He had a little sign in the back of his car that says "We'll drive at night." So he got a lot of women, and he had a life until he was 95. So there was no crime involved in that, other
Yeah.
than a lot of dating.
That is funny. That is funny. That is really funny. Um, so I love it that, the Laura is based upon your wife, and like you said, the audience they can't see it, but her beautiful artwork, and I see her, in the back, and she's very beautiful herself. Hey. Um, and so can you tell us a little bit about you guys' love story? How did you guys meet?
Oh, well, we met on the street. She picked me up. It was,
Oh.
well, she'll say I picked her up, but it was we were we were at it was an art fair in San Francisco, and literally we were walking in opposite directions. Actually, I was standing under the marquee of the theater listening to some music, and it was an art fair that's every year. And she wasn't in the art fair that year. She had just come back from a trip to South to Mexico and Central America, and we just saw each other on the street. And I guess I was staring at her,
Mhm.
probably ogling her, I'm sure, because when she looked up at me and said, "What, do you know me?" Like that. And I said, "No, but I'd like to." And that was that was it.
Okay.
So we started, she kind of disappeared, and it was uh, an art festival, but there was music and lots of stuff on the street. And there was a reunion of the Drifters band, which is that old band, that did Under the Boardwalk, and they
Hmm.
literally had just come from doing Vegas, and they were in San Francisco doing a show out, and they played at this festival. And I just happened to see her stop to watch it, and because we had separated for about an hour from when we said a couple of things to each other, and so I saw her standing there, so I just was standing behind her. She turned around and looked at me. We started talking again. We went out that night. We went out the next night, the next night, and the next night. And the place where we live now, this is now 35 years. We moved into this place 3 months later, and we've been here ever since.
Now that's a love story.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That is very cool. Oh my gosh. Wow. Now, were you already practicing as a lawyer?
Yeah, yeah, I had, and she worked in a law firm as a legal secretary.
Look at
So
that.
yeah, yeah, but she was that was between, because as a painter you can't, you have to have a job, you have a
Yeah.
day job. So I mean that
Hmm.
was one thing we have had in common, is I think we both have a lot of discipline towards our work. I mean, and she keeps me moving because she's much more disciplined than I am now.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, and she'll spend the day between the piano playing, which is in the other room, and painting at the easel. So she's back and forth. So I get a concert every day, in addition to getting full of paint all over me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is wonderful. Now I want to ask you this question because how did you, I mean, you told us how you got into writing, but
Hmm.
what made you go into law versus just being a full-time writer?
When I think my father had a big influence on me that way. He always used to talk about criminal lawyers, and it was really weird. Not that weird, but I mean, my parents ran a department store on the west side of Chicago in Lawndale, which is it was originally in the old 40s. It was a Jewish neighborhood, and then it was one of those migration places, and now it's completely African American neighborhood. It's where Obama used to have offices there,
Oh, wow.
and in Lawndale, and it was burned down during the riots in the 60s. My parents had a clothing store there,
Mm,
and it was close to the criminal court building in Chicago at
mm,
26th and California, which is still the criminal court building. And you see all the TV shows and stuff. That's where
mhm,
Cook County Jail is, right there.
mm.
Largest jail in the country, I think, Court County Jail. And I used to spend a lot of time there, but not then. I mean, my father, on during the day in the summertime, it would be very quiet in the store, and my parents worked in the store together. So he would get in his car and he would drive 10 blocks to the criminal court building and sit and watch trials in the afternoon.
Really?
Yeah, people used to do that. I mean, it was entertainment, it was free. It was like going to the movies, and I don't think it was air conditioned, but it was cool because it was,
Yeah.
So I used to hear stories about that all the time, and he's Perry Mason and stuff. So when I was growing up, in my mind, I guess I just wanted to emulate what my father thought I should do, and I didn't really think that much about it. My sister had also gone to the same university. She's older than I am. We went to the University of Wisconsin, and she was there before me. And I had thought, okay, I'll go there. And I wound up going there. And I hadn't really, I originally started to thought about medical school, because that was the other thing. If you were a Jewish kid, you either went to medical school or law school, and you had to figure out a way to get there. I mean, and my parents weren't that wealthy. I mean, they were able to provide for me for college, but then law school, I had to take student loans and everything like everybody else. But when I was
Mhm.
in college, I originally was going in pre-med, and I hated organic chemistry. didn't do very well in that. And so I kind of said, okay, now I'm not going to do that. I loved art always, and that's probably another reason why my wife, it became easier to always want to be, to fall in love with an artist. I guess it was something that I thought about because I'm not a very good artist, but I am a really good curator. And when she does exhibitions and stuff, I'm lucky enough that I get to curate the shows, so that's good. So I studied art history when I was in college, and then I thought about that as, well, who's going to have a career as a curator? That's all you can do as a curator in a museum. And I thought, what didn't know. I was actually, but I said, okay, I'll go to law school. And this is a true story. Um, I went to register to DePaul University, the law school, and I was accepted there on a tuition remission kind of scholarship thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to register, and I ran into a woman who had been in my freshman year homeroom in high school. So it had been 8 years since I'd seen her, really, and never see her again. She came up to me, and I just wasn't sure. You'll know from the story. She said, we're going to school together again. I looked at her. I said, I don't know. And I went into the dean's office, and I said, is there any way, if I don't go now, that you could save my spot for next time? This was in August, end of August. He said, yeah, if you come back next March for the sex, no, next September, we'll be able to accommodate you. So I said, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Went to pay my tuition. I had $900, which was my bar mitzvah money, the presents that I got from my bar mitzvah when I was 13. And that was what I was using for my first year semester tuition. I took it and I got a ticket on Icelandic Airlines, and I flew to London, and I spent a year in Europe because I had no way I was going to school. And it took me that year. I started writing, and I literally started writing a book, which I didn't never finished it, but I still have the notes from it. It was The Answer to Everyone. I remember that because I had no idea what I was doing. And I started working on this book, and I traveled throughout Europe and North Africa and came back, went to law school, and I was really good at it because I knew then that I wanted to do it. So that's how it happened, and finished, and then
Mm.
started practicing. And I was lucky
Wow.
because when I graduated, I got a job right away with some really good criminal defense, private defense. I wasn't a public defender. I worked for these folks who were experts at certain things, and that's how I learned how to try murder cases. Was that
Mm-hmm.
my first boss was a really, really wonderful trial lawyer, and his partner became a judge. Um,
Mm.
so that's the people that taught me.
Mm-hmm. So I can imagine that when we get to the part in the book where there's a trial, that one is really crafted out really well.
Well, it's based on experience, although
Mm-hmm.
I try to keep it funny. So you make mistakes on purpose so that but those are devices you use. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, I'm working on the sequel right now to the book because the characters were really wonderful and I really liked them. And the publishers wanted me to do another one, and I hadn't really thought about it, but I knew the characters were still alive. So I'm halfway through the new book, and I'm finding this to be even more fun because
Uh-huh.
I'm now, and to your point, I'm doing more stuff in the courtroom because I think people really like to read that stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
so that's happening.
Yeah, because I'm finding a trend. I have a friend, she's a author herself, and she's been doing this. She just celebrated, and she was over this amount, but she we just celebrated her 100th book. But
Wow,
she's
100
crossed,
books.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
She's been doing this for years.
I
Um,
imagine.
but she just crossed over to the cold cases. And so what we've been finding is the trend is people love court cases.
Hmm.
I mean, and then when you think about, like, I know when I sat down and I thought about it, I was like, well, I guess, you know, like I'm a CSI person. I'm a Law and Order. Like I will watch Law and Order from
Hmm.
sun up and sundown, and I probably have
Hmm.
seen those episodes like two and three times, right?
Sure.
Um, and then when you talked about your father going and sitting in the courthouse, it made me think about, you know what? I knew people who literally would go and do that too. They would go
Yeah.
and sit
Some
at the
people love
courthouse.
jury duty.
Hmm.
Some people love jury duty. I've tried a lot of jury cases, and that's a really interesting um, uh, example of humanity. You know, you see the cross section of people that come in and sit for a jury and what their motives are and how they do it, and you get to look at them and see where they're from, and everybody's got a story, you know, and everybody also wants to hear a story. So, and everybody can relate to that too, because I mean, have you ever been on jury duty?
They have called me for jury duty. I don't know how many times, but I
And
have
you always
been.
get out?
I'm always getting out, always getting out. So
I mean, you don't go, or you go and
they
then they
never
kick
call me.
you.
They always say we don't need you. You're not needed. So
But you've never made it to the box. You've only been on the phone. Right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, see,
I
now,
don't
I mean, as a lawyer, I got called and I got sat in the box once here in San Francisco, which is really weird.
really.
Yeah, I mean, they never in Chicago. If you're a lawyer there, you just go to the judge and you say, they said, no, they don't want you there. And, you know, because I wouldn't, now they have lawyers on juries all the time. And it was very interesting. My experience was, and I'll tell you this because it's kind of funny because I didn't realize how they felt about it here is very different than where I grew up because it
Hmm.
was no big deal if you didn't, you know, especially if you're a lawyer, they didn't want you. But now they called me, they put me in the box. It was a criminal case, and the judge and I, you know, you fill out the questionnaire. And at the beginning of it, I wrote in there, I'm a lawyer and I've had trial experience, and I don't think I should be on this. I'm practicing in this court, right? But and also, I think that a lawyer with experience is going to have an undue influence in the jury room, especially someone
Right.
with a big mouth like me. You know, so it's like I don't think I'm right. And so the judge he started chastising me in front, you know, because I said, you know, I said when they sat me in the box, they put me in there, and he says to me, so you wrote on here that you didn't think you want to be on, and he goes, um, did you it wasn't he didn't say do you think you're too good for us, it was something like you think you're too smart to be on this, something like that. It was like a really, you know, it was kind of a condescending remark to me, which took me
Wow.
back. And it was really funny because I didn't know the judge obviously, and he didn't know me, or I don't think he would have spoken that way, unless he did know me, didn't like me, but he didn't. So
Hmm.
and my first book had just come out, which is really funny because it's about a judge who gets indicted for bribery. That's the first book, Prisoners of Truth. And so that's what the story is about, a lawyer and a judge who got indicted for bribery. Now, he didn't even know anything about that. But when he said that to me, I said to him, well, you know, I don't, and I explained to him what I just said to you. I think maybe I'd have too much influence in the jury room. He says, you're too smart for me. I said, no. I said, but I just also just wrote this book. And it's a novel and it's about to come out or it'll just come out or something. He goes, what's it about? And I said, it's about a judge who gets indicted for bribery. He said, okay, you're excused. That's true. So you never know.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So let's talk about this book, right?
Which one?
Where did that storyline come from?
Oh, well, that's actually was based. Yeah, this book, Prisoners of Truth, which is, and actually it's the publishing company is going to reissue it next year sometime. So it's
Okay.
really nice. Yeah, in addition, because this book's now coming out, and then maybe by the end of the year, people can get this one. It's not out there yet. I mean, it's 10, 15 years old, so there are no more copies. The print runs over, but so they're going to reissue it, which is great. And it's a it was this it's also a crime story, but it's more than that because it was a coming of age story about two people who are really the opposite coins of the same person. It's about a lawyer who's a really famous lawyer in Chicago, and it's not true. I mean, he gets during the 80s, 70 and 80s, there was a scandal called the Gaylord case, which is
Mm,
where there were a bunch of, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it was a huge corruption scandal that was basically in Cook County. It involved a
mm,
lot of judges and went to jail. They infiltrated, the federal government started putting prosecutors into the courtrooms because they knew the judges and certain lawyers were partaking in bribery. They were buying cases, and so they literally engaged some prosecutors, state prosecutors, to act as informants.
Mm.
which had never been happened before. And they literally were able to get a search warrant to put a bug in a judge's chambers. So I mean, and so a lot of judges went to jail and stuff. So I wrote the book based on it. That was one part of the story, and it was about this writer who comes upon this lawyer during the case that he's getting accused of being bribed. He's a reporter, and he's at the trial. It's in Cook County, and as the lawyer's participating with the judge in a case that gets thrown out, it's a bad search warrant case. The writer thinks that it's fine, there's no bribery going on, and then 3 months later he finds out that the lawyer gets accused of bribery. And they had seen each other in the courtroom that day because they went to college together back in the day. So the book
Mm.
goes back in time to when they first met, and how the writer always looked up to the lawyer because he was an activist at the time during the 60s, and so he wanted to be he emulated him because the writer had never really made it. And then fast forward to the 80s, where the lawyer is really famous. They run into each other again, and the writer's working as a cab driver and a bartender,
Mm.
and they have a thing with this over the same woman. And then it takes place in the present, where the lawyer engages the writer to try to be help him out because of the bribery. He wants the writer to actually be his flack, to write good things about him, to try to help him because he's known him all these years. So he's kind of manipulating the writer into it, but the writer's trying to find out what really happens. And in the end, the lawyer winds up getting exposed. So then,
Wow.
and the writer has wound up doing something to someone who was his idol. But it's about how they transform each other. So that's what the book's
I love the way that your brain just like,
about.
oh my gosh. I mean, another page turner. Like that, but I don't want to read it. When are they going to
Oh.
put it in print? Like, send it to me.
Okay.
I'm excited about this book too because I love it. I love the way that you orchestrate the characters and the storylines. It makes you can see the good, the evil. You can see how, life can be start off one way, but then there's a chain of events that can come in and ultimately alter your life, and you end up where you should be right on
hmm
time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that because that's really the intention, is that we're all sort of the same. We're all different, we're all the same person, different sides. We could
Mm-hmm.
be different things. And I think, the experience that I've had of being able to navigate in law all these years and also step into being a writer, and whether it's a screenplay or poetry or whatever it is, to get out of that other part of yourself. You see things in that exist that that make us all the same, because our lives can just do anything in a minute. It can be over. So
Yeah.
you really can.
Yeah, even in Raise Your Other Right Hand, which will be out March 11th.
Thank you.
When you think about the basketball player, like, man,
Yeah, I mean
he's
that was the point. He's at the top of his game. I mean he
mm-hmm.
was the rookie of the year. He's he the year that he was out with the knee surgery, which got him hooked on pills that the team was providing. See, that's also part of the legal issue here, is that there's malpractice on the part of the doctors, which is raised as an issue by Archie to try to force the team not to get rid of him, by the fact that, hey, you're the one that enabled him all these years to play in pain by your doctors were prescribing these addictive,
Mm-hmm.
like oxycodone, so
Mm-hmm.
that you could play in pain, and now you're going to get rid of the guy when it's your fault. And that way that he's a drug addict, because as a consequence, he might have brain damage that's affecting his nerve endings, so he can't play as well. But it's your fault.
Yeah.
I mean, it's his fault. He took the drugs, but at the same time. So yeah, I mean, and the idea that you could be at the top of your game and in an instant things can change.
Oh, and also, what will you do to stay at the top of your game?
Well, that's the thing, that's a good question. I mean, what do you do to stay at the top of your game?
Oh
What do
God,
what
what
do
do I
you
do?
do?
Oh my gosh, I do a lot of praying. I do a lot of praying.
Okay.
I do
Yeah,
a lot of
well,
I do a lot
you're
of
not
praying.
alone.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I do. I really do. I do a lot of praying. Meditating, and I've just learned how to just say no.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a hard one, isn't it?
It is.
Especially when your life, I can't speak for you, but I get a sense of who I think you may be in this way. And that if you do a lot of service for people, you always want to say yes. You don't want to
Yes.
say no. And there's that moment of guilt about I can, we're blessed people to be able to be sitting here having this conversation and other people are listening to us. I mean, I don't take that for granted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really, I get it that,
Mm-hmm.
you have an influence, however small, however big, you can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so then you better just pay attention. That's what my mother used to say, just pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's simple advice usually works too.
Oh gosh, it does. I had something the other day. Had a client, and I normally don't see children, and I've only taken two in, and I've had these two for a couple of years now. But one of my and it's hard to have children. My hat is off to those therapists and those counselors who see children. That's their thing, right? Mine, that's just not mine. But I have these two anyway. So um, I just had to refer one out when you talk about being in service all the time and always seeing
Hmm.
it. So my heart is for the babies, and so that's why I don't see them because it's like I see certain
Hmm.
things, and it's like, oh, the mother inside of me kicks in, and it's like so anyway, long story short, the my client was open up about something, and immediately she asked me a question, and I wanted to say yes, but I had to stop,
And
and I
think about
couldn't
it, right?
say yes.
Hmm.
And I said, okay, I'm gonna have to refer them. I'm gonna have to refer her out. But yes, it's hard. It
Yeah.
is hard to say no.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I'm grateful for the idea that I can do it. I mean, if it's been over 45 years of being an attorney. The amount of things I've seen, the strangest situations, you can't imagine stuff that, that comes past your life. And people have, and the problems they have. And if you have the ability to help someone, I just, it's really hard to say no. It's really hard to say. I mean, and
Hmm.
I'm grateful to be able to do that. That's part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you this question. So I've had another defense attorney on a couple of weeks ago, and this is what he said to me. He said, what people don't realize, he said, being a criminal defense attorney, people oftentimes they say, oh, you always defending criminals. They're guilty, they're guilty. And he said, what people don't realize is that um what we're trying to do is help them to get the correct sentence, and we also understand that some of these people are put in these situations because you don't even understand the life that they have had to live.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so what is your take on that?
Well, I told you earlier on that that it has a heavy emotional toll because you can't, as much as you try to be apart from it. Now, I think this is maybe it's indicative of the kind of individual one is, because I think about this in the context of medicine, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you go to where your doctor doesn't want to call you by your name. Have you noticed
Mm-mm.
that? Have
Mm-hmm.
you ever noticed that? That they don't want to personalize the relationship. So sometimes they want, and this is not a knock on doctors. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that that's what they're taught. You can't
Mm-hmm.
personalize this because then you're going to get emotionally invested, and then you're going to go back to what we just said. If your goal is service, you're not going to say no. So there's somewhere that you have to make a line that says these people are my patients. They're not my friends. They're not my family. And that's why they don't recommend you operate on your mother, or your
Mm-hmm.
husband or whatever. So, because you don't want to personalize it. And I understand that from the medical point of view, you have to have a cold and calculating scientific approach. Law tries to be science, but it's social. It's
Mm.
sociology. It's not, and I understand what your other guest was saying because it's the same. It's true. And I told you that earlier on. 99% of the people I represent are guilty. There's two. To me, it's two purposes. One is what you just described that your guest said, which was the opposite of what the doctor says, which is to personalize the individual before the court, make the court understand this person came from someplace that put him here, that we are not all good and we are not all bad. We are people, we are complicated human beings, and we fuck up apart like
Mm-hmm.
just now.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
You
and
know,
we
you're fine.
and we do, and
Mm-hmm.
so you try to make it in a context for the court, whether it's a jury or a judge, to understand what are the circumstances that brought this person here. That's
Mm-hmm.
one function of it. The other function of it is to make sure that the system works. You've heard this 1,000 times, but it's true. I'd rather have 100 guilty people go free than one innocent person go to jail.
Mm.
And that's kind of what the system is based on. Again, the political question I don't want to get into, but that's changing now. We're in a very, very, I'll say this, it's a dangerous time for the
Yes,
law.
it,
A
yes, it
very
is.
dangerous time because the principles on which our Constitution was based are now, frankly, being subverted for the sake of corporatism, for whatever you
Yes,
want to call it.
yes.
The focus on the individual and their freedom and what's happened, whether it's a reaction socially or whatever it is, we're in a different time. But that
Mm-hmm.
was and is, to my mind, one of the bedrock functions of law is to maintain that structure between what's legally permissible and what is not. And the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution tells us that. I mean, it's not, like you say, you watch Law and Order all the time. Well, you can say what your rights are. I'm sure if someone asks you, you got a right to remain silent, you got a right to attorney. If you can't afford one, there'll be a point. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
knows that. But I got news for you. The police still don't follow that.
Yes, yes.
So you
Uh, uh,
have to have that
mm,
rule.
yeah, that's good because I had the so I'm sure you're familiar with the Memphis 3.
The what?
The Memphis Three, the murder trial,
Of
the
course.
Memphis
Yeah, yeah.
Three.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I had the attorney to that because he's got a new book out. So I had him on, and he gave us some tips on what to do if you're ever arrested and put into the interrogation room. And I thought to myself, OMG, OMG.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that much different than what you do see on TV now. Most of that the interesting thing to me is, and just as a quick thing, the guy who does Law and Order and all those shows, Dick Wolf, he's from
Mm-hmm.
Chicago. So there's and part of a lot of the crime people somehow come from, I don't know why it is, but there's always been this historical connection to crime and stuff, going all the way back to the gangsters, to Al Capone and stuff. It's always been, when you go travel now, maybe it's not the same, but my wife and I traveled a lot, and everywhere we go, if you tell them you're from Chicago, they go Al Capone. This is 10 years ago. They're still
Mm-hmm.
doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard Chicago is a pretty rough place.
Well,
I've
I haven't been there in a while,
Yeah,
so I don't know.
yeah, yeah. I
But
thank you for it. Go ahead. I want you to
no, no,
finish.
no, no, nothing. I was going to just continue to ask you about what he told you should do when they lock you up. I'm
Okay.
curious.
So he told us that when we go in there, he said, do not say anything. He said, don't say nothing. You tell them you want your lawyer off the bat. He said, I don't care what it is. He said, don't answer that one question. He said, because their job is to trip you up.
hmm
He said, that's
Yeah.
what they're trying to do.
That's
He
why
said,
they have you there. They want information out of you. And whether they want to prove you're guilty or not is beyond the question of they want to gather as much information as they can. They have a right to do that to solve a crime because there is a victim. But at the same time, if and this is where it always used to go south, and it still does, depending on who the individual is, that person who's interrogating them already has a cultural bias.
yes,
You're not
yes.
starting on it's not an even playing field to begin with. So that's another reason why it is good advice not to say anything, because then you cut through the idea that, hey, I didn't do anything, but this guy looks at me because my skin is dark. I did it. I mean, what the hell is that? But
Mm-hmm.
that is not, so
Yeah, yeah.
you know
So
what I'm
that was
saying.
his advice. He said never answer anything. He said because they will trip you up. And then he started talking to us about the when they have witnesses. He says, he said, you can't remember what happened to you last week. You say you saw somebody. He said, you can't remember. He said, you're
Hmm.
not going to. He said, you're not going to. He said, but that's
Hmm.
how they get people with these witnesses from a year ago, 2 weeks ago. And I was like, he just
Hmm.
was, and so he was just telling us a little bit more about the case and how, because if you don't ask for a lawyer, um, it can go on for hours.
Hmm. Yeah, in
And
some states you could stay, they'll keep you for 12, 14 hours, 40,
yeah,
24 hours. Yeah. And they'll keep bringing you back and bringing you back. And,
yeah,
it's not, I mean, it's the idea of false confessions it's a real thing. I mean, it is a
hmm,
real thing. And at some point, people get so beaten down, they'll say anything just to get
yeah,
the hell out of there.
yeah, and that's what
And
happened to
it's
his
not
client.
I mean, I've had cases like that,
Hmm.
and the one thing that's really interesting to me, and I don't know the if this is something, I'm sure you probably didn't touch on this, but if I had a client who insisted that they were innocent, right? And I just looked at the facts and I'm going, you're lying. I just know you're lying to me. It's like
Hmm.
I would take them and literally force them, my own clients, to have a lie detector test, even though it was inadmissible. I mean, if you really want to do that, I did that maybe 4 times. Okay, the idea being, if they pass, even though it's inadmissible, you could get that in front of the prosecutor and they look at it and it makes them think twice about where they're going. So that's one thing. And
Hmm.
also it clears up. I mean, a lot of lawyers will tell you, criminal lawyers, I don't want to know whether the client did it or not. Right. And I was never of that. I wouldn't, if I asked them and they said no, I wasn't going to press them unless I felt it was really important that I knew, because if they refused to admit something that was true, they were going to wind up with a much worse sentence than if they told the truth to me.
Hmm.
Okay, because when you get into the idea of plea bargaining with a client, no client wants to come in. A lot of people, first of all, we all as human beings have a tendency to want to confess.
Hmm.
That's in our makeup. It's in our
Hmm.
makeup. So that's another reason why the police have an advantage. You if you go to church, if you have any connection to a spirit or God of any kind, you know when you've done something wrong
Hmm.
and it hurts you. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that what's that famous saying? Your when your conscience is the thing that's supposed to hurt when you think you've done, when you think you've done
Hmm.
something right.
Hmm.
I'll think of the actual quote in a minute, but it's the conscience. Your conscience is supposed to bother you in that moment.
Yeah.
So I think we have a tendency to confess. But if I have a client who says to me, I didn't do this, and the prosecutor is 100 convinced that they did. They may have a fingerprint, they have DNA, they have something that's really hanging this person, his signature, something, and you know that if you go to trial, you're going to lose,
Hmm.
because it's this one evidence. This jury is not going to reject this no matter what you do. It's real. And if they get convicted after a jury trial, there's no lawyer in the world that will tell you you will not get a worse sentence than if you plea bargain. Okay,
Yeah.
except in horrendous murder cases that are that the press is all over it and the prosecutor can't make a deal because it's political. It's become that way.
Hmm.
So, but almost every case, if you have a client who's willing to plead guilty, you'll get a better sentence than if they go to trial and are found guilty. So you're in that situation as the lawyer, and because in the end, if you go to trial and you lose, they're going to blame you anyway. You did it. And aside from that, you don't want the client to have the worst outcome. So
Yeah.
in those situations, I've given the client a lie detector test. Two of them flunked, and two of them refused to take it because then they fessed up because they knew they were going to flunk.
So what do
So
you?
there are internal or mechanisms that you can use if
Hmm.
you as the lawyer don't feel. But that's an interesting dynamic when you think about it. I mean, a lot of lawyers,
Yeah.
they don't even want to know whether the client did it or not. That's the
Yeah.
only reason I really want to know.
Yeah.
And
No.
it's also, if you're a lot of times guilty. I used to say that I like to know because a guilty person knows what happened. They can tell you what happened. So if the police screwed up somehow, you can take advantage of that. That was a persuasive argument with a client. But so that was one. It's always good to know because an
Hmm.
innocent person, generally, it's like you said, you don't remember. 3 days ago. Well, particularly if you didn't think anything happened, while at the same time across the street someone was getting shot, and you
Yeah.
don't remember the details of that because it didn't involve you. You didn't. You maybe you heard something. That's it. You don't know what happened. So
Right.
I can't defend you if I don't know what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It was we had a funny billboard here. I think maybe 2 years ago, and it was so fun, hilarious. So it was a lawyer, and he was advertising his services. He said, even if you killed them, I can get you off. It was literally the billboard. We laughed. I mean, people were making memes about this thing,
I'll
and
bet.
this guy was serious. He even went on to do a commercial saying the same. And I thought, who is this guy? You
Yeah.
know, we
Did
like
you get him on your podcast?
no. It was funny because it's funny you said that because a friend of mine asked me, she said, why don't you get him on there? And when we went back to try to find the billboard, because we didn't
Right.
pay attention
It's
enough
gone.
attention for the name, it was down. And so she went to try to look him up. And I want to say that she said that he had become a judge.
Well, that's the opposite of what I was thinking, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
don't, that's why he took the sign down because now he can't advertise anymore. But the fact is, if you're advertising a guaranteed outcome of a case, that's against the canons of ethics of every state.
Wow.
You can't advertise that. The only thing you can advertise, as far as I know, in terms of there are, believe it or not, it's like is that when someone says ethics with a lawyer, is that an oxymoron? But it's it's
Hmm.
there are
Yeah.
ethical constraints, and one of them, which is you cannot guarantee an outcome. You can represent on cases that are on contingencies, where that you see that all the time. The Lawyer Brothers and the Sweet, all these other, like they guarantee that you won't pay anything unless you recover. That's not the
Hmm.
same thing as saying, if you did it, I'll get you off.
Right.
No, you can't say that.
That was hilarious. I
Well, I'm
mean,
not surprised he's a judge. Is this in North Carolina you're
it's
talking
in
about?
North Carolina. It is in North Carolina. I mean, cause we were trying to find it and we had to
Hmm.
dig, dig, dig. So he might have maybe before he became a judge or something, he got in trouble. I don't know. I just know
Well,
that the signs were nowhere to be found at the time we went to try
got
to
it, got
find it.
it. Well, I could say that if he was a judge, the sign would come down, but also I would think that the Bar Association would have told him to take it down if
They
anybody
should.
would have complained.
Yeah, and I'm sure around here they probably did complain.
Well, I don't
Yeah.
know. Is that you got a chatty little neighborhood you got there?
We got a little bit, it's a little bit of competition around here. It is not
Okay.
always nice with these lawyers. It's some of the things you hear is like, oh my gosh. So I want tell us, if you don't mind, before we go,
Hmm.
what is one of your most memorable cases that you had that you
Wow.
tried?
Probably my first one.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just out of, I mean, it's a bizarre story. This is how I learned. I got thrown into a courtroom. It was a gang in Gary, Indiana called the Family Gang. And they were responsible for about 40 murders and about 80% of the heroin that flowed through the Northeast corridor. And the guy that I worked for, when I took my first boss, his specialty was murder trials and also narcotics cases. And so people came to him with heavy narcotics cases. And this was a big federal trial. And in those days, they had first started doing these large conspiracy cases where they would try 15 people at the same time by grouping them together, and using the new federal statute to do that. And so this was a case that took place in Gary in Hammond in the federal courthouse. I had literally passed the bar in November. This
Mm-hmm.
trial started in January of the 2 months later. Okay, a federal jury
Wow.
trial with 12 defendants. There were 26 defendants indicted, 14 of them flipped on the rest of the people in the gang. And the trial was going to last 8 weeks with a sequestered jury who was living in a motel. So my boss, we were only there was my there was I was work I had just come to work for him, literally. His
Mm-hmm.
brother was an attorney, and his partner who became the judge was there. There was the three of them. And so they hired me to pretty much, because he was going to do, a couple trials were being done, for me to just go to make appearances in court to get cases continued, because I didn't collect some money, maybe, I had done that twice. That's it. And so but I had some courtroom experience in my last year in law school. They had a
Mm-hmm.
clinic where you could become, if you worked with a licensed attorney, you got a special license to appear in court. So I had a little bit of, minor experience arguing cases a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So when he got this case, he took it, and it was one of those things where he knew it was going to be a lot of publicity, and he knew it was going to be a good case for the office, but he wasn't going to get any money,
Mm-hmm.
not enough anyway. And he couldn't sit there. He said, if I take this case for 8 weeks and be there every day, my practice will die. You got a big mouth, you go do it. And I'm like, what do you mean go do it? I'm going to try this case? Because there's a lot of lawyers there. They're going to help you. So we didn't even tell the client, because he would have gone crazy. So I show up for the first day. There's jury selection, takes a week. The jury's sequestered, and every day all the lawyers get together, and there were all these. I mean, it's an amazing experience for me, because I had no idea what was going on, except that these guys really mentored me. And fortunately, my client he was not an active member of the gang, but he was supposedly one of the heroin suppliers. So he would only come in from time to time. And during the course of the trial, he was probably not mentioned as much as the others, and we sat in a corner because I didn't want to have anything to do with the rest of the case. But they're good, there were really, really well-known criminal lawyers in the area, had schlepped down there every day. It was a 40-minute ride from Chicago in the morning and then back, and literally 6 days a week. From January 20th until March 15th was the day of the verdict. That's how long this case took. And so I'm there every day, and I'm learning as I'm going. And this is true. The first time that it was in a big ceremonial courtroom, there were 3 Gary policemen who were defendants in the case, because they were part of the gang, because they'd given them the drugs and helped them in jail and stuff. And so there were 12 defendants. I'm at 2 huge tables for the defendants, 1 table for the prosecutor, and I'm at the very back corner of this thing, away from the jury box, because I'm trying to isolate my client, because he's not really part of the gang. The first time that one of the gang members gets up and starts talking about how my client was at this place and everything, it's my turn to get up and cross-examine him. I've never done this before in front of a jury. I
Mm-hmm.
stood up, and my feet froze at the table. I couldn't walk to the podium. I had to stand in the back of the courtroom and shout my questions. I was so nervous. But ultimately that was the first experience. And the trial went on and it went on and went on. And I'll be damned that after 10 guilties, 2 not guilties, and I got 1 of them.
Wow. Look at that.
That's it. So that was my favorite. That was probably the first one. It's been downhill ever since.
Oh, wow. 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 Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us on today.
Oh no, this is great. It was really sweet to talk to you.
Yeah. And so we want to go out. I have my copy. So it just came in the mail today. I'm excited. So I'm going to start reading. I'm excited. I mean, after talking to you, if nobody wants to go read, it's because they were not listening. Because
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I
look,
want you to tell me what you think. I can take it. If you didn't
yeah,
like it, it'll be good.
yeah, I'm excited. And so we want to run out. The link will be in the bio. March 11th is when the book will drop. You can go and get your pre-orders now. You can
Yes,
go.
yeah, it's available now on Barnes and Noble and on Amazon.
Okay, so
And they
I'm
have a special if you want on Amazon. If you want to get the Kindle book instead, it's $2 off. So it's
oh
even
wow.
better.
Okay, well good. Can we is that on pre-order too?
Yeah.
Okay, so good. So we'll have the links in the bio.
Oh, great.
Um, so please, please, please make sure you go out and you get your copy. And we're excited for the other book to come out too. Look, I'm rooting. Please send me a copy. Look, I want it. I'm excited for it. I'm looking for some of this stuff to be on TV.
Well, hey, from your mouth to God's ears, huh?
Look, and normally, from what I understand, he evidently listens to me. So we're gonna say that it's
Well,
gonna
I
be
hope so.
that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Haven for Soul Care. We hope today's conversation has provided you with the encouragement and tools to take care of yourself and embrace the journey ahead. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and sharing it with others who may benefit. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. Take a moment today to nurture your soul. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Haven for Soul Care. We hope today's conversation has provided you with the encouragement and tools to take care of yourself and embrace the journey ahead. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and sharing it with others who may benefit. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. Take a moment today to nurture your soul. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.